Welcome, everybody. I've got two microphones here. Very fancy. My name is Alan Chochinov. I'm the chair of the MFA Products of Design Department here where you are, so welcome for people who don't live here or go to school here / live here. We are very, very happy and proud to have Dale Dougherty here for tonight, kicking off our lecture series for the 2015-16 season. So thank you, Dale, as the inaugural speaker. Yeah. So I believe that history is changed by individuals, and I believe that Dale Dougherty is one of those individuals. I don't know if anybody has done as much to shepherd and to nurture the maker movement, codifying it in some sense, giving it literally a publication of that name, giving it a festival and a fair, giving people permission to feel like they belong to something where they might have felt marginalized as maybe tinkerers and not in some sense socially acceptable, and really turning them into, in some sense, like heroes at this point. And this has been a quick transition, a quick ride. And I think that it's particularly critical now in this country in particular because of the just absolute decimation of courses like shop classes and auto shop and wood shop and metal shop and drafting and electronic shop that I remember so fondly that really made me a designer. The elimination of art classes, of home ec, of cooking, of sewing, of music classes. We are really in this country at the end, hopefully, of raising a generation of people who don't know how to do anything or make anything or fix anything. Designers have been absolutely complicit in this by sealing sub-assemblies into housings that are glued instead of screwed, by hiding externalities and costs of production and labor costs to the point where products are cheaper to replace than to fix. And in some sense, inculcating or training a generation of people to be consumers and to not feel any kind of agency in their built environment, agency of their built environment, that their job is to consume and then to dispose and then to consume again. And designers, as a discipline, to be critical, have done very little to slow this and have done quite a lot to accelerate it. And so enter to the rescue the maker movement, which I think gives people this permission, this spirit, this ennobling of agency, of I can actually do things with my hands and with my head. I can be creative. I can invent. I can create change. I can share, right? So things like Instructables and GitHub and just so many online platforms, I think really owe their debt to the maker movement. And the maker movement is very, very proud, as we are, to have Dale as its really, in some sense, its initial cheerleader and tireless in cheerleading on forward. And I don't know what's in store next, but it's going pretty well so far. Everything from Maker Faire Africa to working with high schools. And hopefully Dale will talk a little bit about each of those things. So I want to thank you from everybody. I want to thank you from me as a friend, and I want to pre-thank you from them for coming to spend the evening with us. So please welcome Dale Dougherty.
Thank you. Well, it's a real privilege to be here tonight. It's such a great place. I saw it a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and it's just continued to grow. And I wouldn't mind living here. I wouldn't mind working here. But for tonight, I kind of prepared more a context for us to talk. I hope about something that. Is a way of maybe looking at making, looking at the maker movement that, actually just started occurring to me within the last week or so. And it really is this title of Making is Community Service, and I'll kind of explain it to you in a little bit. But when I started the magazine and even the Faire, I was really, one of the things I was struck by was just how personal making is to people, that it means something to them. And we had to almost just get out of the way, like don't encumber it with a bunch of other things. And some, like, why are you doing this? Is this going to be a business? Or why are you doing this? Is this your career? Or why are you doing this? It seems like you're just playing. And it almost wanted to just say making is playful, making is agency, making is social. And the acts of doing it, the process, was almost more important than any outcome that it generated. And what I saw in creating a magazine, in some ways, I wanted to make it possible for more people to do things. And the analogy I had in my head was almost to cooking. Like, we have probably better cooks today, more people who cook well than ever before. And it's kind of a confluence of media with health, with a sense of agency that I can make my own food. Probably the same, it's the dichotomy between fast food and slow food. We probably both are about as big as they could ever be. But in some ways, making is more equivalent to the slow food idea of, where do ingredients come from? What do I do with them? How do I actually look locally for the things that are growing and use them instead of just, yes, I can get anything at any time from anywhere, but how do I think differently about cooking? But at the heart of cooking is recipes and sharing recipes, and that's whether it's Instructables or the magazine or other things. We've used the internet to share recipes. It's easier if you're certainly researching, I want to do something. And the way I kind of always thought with the magazine is by publishing an article about something, we weren't trying to necessarily say you should make it, but we wanted you to be able to make it. And I think by even reading about things, you learn. And so when you have your own idea, it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you're borrowing from a lot of different things. If you don't have that sort of background to work from, it's really hard to get started. It's really hard to take an idea forward. And, so my goal really has been, people looking at how people can take an idea and actually make something as a result. And probably have to remake it and do all those other things that you're familiar with. But I think the maker movement, as it's become more popular, I've tended to talk about it in two ways. One, that I have to say I'm interested in, but my heart isn't there, and that's sort of innovation. And I mean startups and new products and things that come out of there. And it's amazing. Things like MakerBot grew out of this. Little Bits grew out of this. And, they're pretty big companies with lots of employees. They've gone through a lot of transitions. All of us do. But it's great in some ways that this has unlocked opportunities there. What I find most interesting to me personally is the way that this has the potential to transform education around the world, to almost bring back and restore the value of learning by doing, which is John Dewey's phrase 100 years ago. You could find similar phrases in Maria Montessori. You could find similar phrases in Seymour Papert about constructionism. And there's been so much, in a sense, groundwork already done for this that says we learn by making things, constructing things, doing things. And it's as if our educational system completely rejects that, because it's not efficient. It's not an efficient means of delivering content to people. And you kind of say education shouldn't even be in the business of delivering content to students. There's content everywhere. It's actually creating a context where kids can have experiences that are meaningful and doing things that are engaging to them. So, as I said, those are kind of my two lenses, innovation and education, and I could go down two of those paths. But what I want to talk to tonight really is almost a third lens to look at the maker movement, and that's community service. And what I'm kind of interested here is not necessarily doing good, but actually the sense of service, of helping other people help themselves, which I think in many ways is so aligned with the DIY spirit. I want to do something myself. And if you could help someone else do something themselves, how good is that? And so I'm going to start here. I just had the phone. I'm going to start with, I have probably more videos than I should show you, but let me tell you. The first is a kind of a summary video from a Makethon about 2 weekends ago. I was a judge at it. I show up on Sunday. I don't want to take any credit for the good work they've done there, but I was really impressed by it. And I have to tell you, I'm very cynical about hackathons and Makethons, particularly these days where corporations have kind of taken them and they're kind of recruiting fairs and pizza parties, and they promise to do a lot and often, they don't. But I was really impressed by what the preparation that went into this Makethon, and it was around assistive technology. And I'll explain a little bit more when you go in, but they basically organized people with talents and they organized challenges. And they tried to do a lot of that before the event opened. And it was about a 72-hour event to do it. And this is almost more a summary of the projects. And so I'll just show you this, and it's just a couple minutes, but it kind of is what set me off in this theme of community service. Took place at Tech Shop in San Francisco. So I know it's that's a lot of projects. But over 72 hours, those teams came together. And one of the key pieces that I thought was so important is they had a person in each group that was, or sometimes more than one, a need knower, they called it. Someone who represented the challenge personally. These weren't abstract challenges, which came off a whiteboard. They were someone who represented that. And, one woman who was born without limbs, her name's Kim. It was about the grab and release device. And she actually wasn't able to come the first day. And the team just started on it. They kind of had her profile. They'd spoken to her. And she shows up the second day, and none of the work they had done worked for her. They weren't aware of the weight of the objects that she could pick up this way, and they were just kind of focused on grasping. But they targeted, worked with her and came up with it. But I felt like each of those need knowers became makers as being part of the process. Like if they were just off somewhere and they weren't in this room, they were really kind of taking on that notion that this is stuff I can do for myself. And I think it isn't that we're really smart people that we can do things for other people and help them. We can, but it's so much more important if they're invested and involved in the process. And I think, it's like working with kids in education or something. Yes, you may be smarter than them, but the trick is to get them to learn and to engage so that, they are going down that path themselves and feel a sense of agency and ownership of what they're doing. What has always amazed me, in a sense, what I see as kind of the universal framing I have for making is engagement. When we're making, we're engaged, might be with tools and materials, but we're in a sense of play, almost so fully engaged. We're not thinking about a dozen other things. We're focused. It's actually a very pleasurable state to be in. And so when I talk about community service, I mean kind of an extension of that sense of engagement, but to mean an engagement with others and working together, whether it's collaboration or really in that sense that we are part of solving a problem together, part of creating something together. What happened is going to that Makethon and thinking about this sort of gave me that lens of community service. And then the weekend after that, which I'm going to go into shortly, I'll explain this in a minute, I went to Maker Faire in Seattle, and I have a bunch of videos just walking around talking to people. And I kind of came back, and I actually didn't think I was doing this for that talk. And sort of afterwards I said, look at that, look at that, look at that, look at that. You could all look at these people as doing community service in this unique way. And that's what I really want to share with you. But just a background, we've been doing Maker Faire for 10 years. And 6th year in New York here. And I'm particularly proud that we've been able to sustain this and keep it going. It gets really complex. I was just out there today. The layout is bigger and we're sprawling. What's so precious to me about New York is that we're on the grounds of where the World's Fair was in 1964. Did anybody see Tomorrowland? Not such a good movie overall in some ways, but I love the opening scene where the kid with a jetpack shows up at the World's Fair, and he's gonna, show them that he's an inventor, a maker. And I've heard that the director, Brad Bush, is very much inspired by the maker movement. He actually has some wonderful phrases in there. I just don't know, it sort of got into a weird place that I don't know what it's about at the end, but it was kind of like, there's a phrase in the movie that says, what if the world could be remade by creators and artists and makers and things like that. And I think we still have or hold on to that almost science fiction kind of dream. But Maker Faire, a little bit like Burning Man, appears to be a created world for like a weekend or longer. And but probably as importantly as the ones here in the Bay Area and New York, we had 131 Maker Fairs around the world last year. I could show you probably what I'm showing you about Seattle in a moment. I could show you from Singapore's perspective or Tokyo's perspective, Paris's perspective, or different cities, large or small. I think it's kind of really amazing that this is somehow connected to people at this moment in time. And I think some of the things that Alan mentioned, part of my framing in the simplest way for people, Maker Faire, is to get people to see themselves as producers, not just consumers. To see that act of creating, building, shaping, making things is who they are. Not just an activity, but it's partly an expression in a very personal way of their own capabilities and their own talents. So to get to 131 Maker Fairs, we needed people out in the community who wanted to organize. So this is a video from, of a woman who's organized Seattle Maker Faire. It's in its 4th year. And probably the content isn't that relevant to you, but just kind of dig what the kind of person she is. And, this is what she does, to bring the community together.
The first year around in 2012, when we started organizing Seattle Mini Maker Faire, brought together a lot of different members of the community, a lot of volunteers, and I helped make it the first year. Second year got even better. We figured out what we were doing. Got quite a few more makers to come the second year. We're now in our 4th year. We're at well over 100 exhibitors. We're very excited to have included people from all over the region.
Yeah. And you have a partner now.
We have a partner. We're now partnered with EMP Museums. This is our 2nd year working with EMP Museum. We're so happy to have them as a partner. EMP Museum is the Experience Music Project, and also they're about pop culture. And one of the things that's really becoming huge in pop culture is re-emergence of the DIY culture. Absolutely. We're seeing an uptick in the number of people who come, the diversity of people who come from all over the region. One of our sponsors is the Snoqualmie Tribe. So we're happy to have a lot of original residents of the Seattle area coming. Right. I am a maker myself. I dabble in a lot of different things. Lately I've been doing a lot of sewing. I think because my grandmother's inspired me. She's 90, she's still doing a lot of sewing. I've also done a lot of robotics and software work.
So it's just it's a person who makes things, but she's also making the community and bringing people together. She was part of a team and felt after the first year that sort of loose team that came together, and she kind of ended up holding on to a lot of things as other people didn't, maybe deliver as promised, but she's taken it. Our next one is she does pop-up science museums, and we'll listen to her for a little bit here.
Well, we're Seattle's first mobile science museum. We don't have a home. That means we pop up in all different types of places, and usually they're really quirky, or sometimes they're somewhere in your community that you don't expect. But we're a bunch of scientists and engineers who think that we want a different type of way to do outreach with our neighborhoods, and we really care about our community. So we're just fun and excited to be here.
Give us an example of one you've done.
So recently we popped up on the ferry to talk about ocean acidification. And in Washington State, there's a lot of ferries that go across the Puget Sound, which is a really big body of water in between a couple different major communities. And it's the ferry actually takes data with sensors under the boat. So we thought it'd be kind of cool to show up on the ferry for like 2 hours and pull water from the boat and look at it under the microscope, and then we were gone. So that was one thing that we've been doing, and it's part of a series called Street Smarts. So hopefully we'll be doing more things like popping up in an elevator to talk about gravity, or popping up on the pier to do more on oceans. But
what's the reaction you got?
Oh, really fun. It's really fun.
Yeah.
I think people don't expect scientists to have a playful or extroverted side.
Right. So, she has a science background, but going out in the community, and she has the freedom to do kind of what she wants. She does make arrangements with like the ferry company, but sometimes working with a museum, you could volunteer, but you're working on their program and their programming. But she can put a network of people together and just go out and do something. And again, part of this theme is it is volunteer. It's something you're doing, but more importantly, it really means a lot to the people that are doing it, or they wouldn't put the time and energy into it. The next person is an instructor, and the question I kind of asked her, she teaches blacksmithing, and I kind of asked is, this is at the Pratt Fine Arts Center, and asked her how things are going.
Managing the sculpture department, the tuition income has really skyrocketed, especially in the blacksmithing department. Maybe because I'm a blacksmith and one of the instructors, I'm not sure, but I've been really trying to make it more interesting, offer some shorter classes that have different interests for people that have taken the beginning classes and the intermediate classes, and they say, now what? So offering short classes that are fun and make you think. And our biggest and best thing that has recently happened is we just got a brand new power hammer. So the people that have gone through all of the intermediate continuing classes, now they can go further using this big machine, which is just fantastic. We couldn't bring it here because it's really heavy.
Yeah. So why do you think there's more interest?
I don't know.
I mean, what do you see in the students that are coming in and taking classes? Age, background? Is it pretty varied?
It's so varied. I mean, I've had students in my blacksmithing classes that are in their 70s. I've had teenagers, people that do tech jobs, people that are, elementary and middle school teachers, people that are thinking about getting into blacksmithing, or people in the welding classes that are thinking about having their own welding shop. So it's a really great place for people to hey, I've got this idea, I want to try to learn this skill, but I don't want to go through technical college.
So I think the key thing, what I really see in the maker community is a sense of workshops and DIY workshops that often don't require credentialing to get in. And again, you're doing it often for your own satisfaction. But she's an example of a teacher doing this. This is another group, and I'm putting up there, they were doing activities at Maker Faire here, but the Seattle Attic Community Workshop particularly focused, it's a feminist organized space trying to be friendly, more friendly than most maker spaces are to women, to the LGBT community, and they have kind of an interesting outreach group there. They're just, at a fair, there's a number of people just organizing activities, and they may be associated with a group. Sometimes they're just a small group. This is a paper making activity at the fair. And this when it was an after-school club, the Big Brain Superheroes Club, and and they brought two of the young girls that are making things, and they had me baffled. But this is sort of a game to teach you binary and coding, right? And so if you turn on, they'd say, okay, ask me, can you get to 201? Flipping the right switches here. I'd say this is the same week after we had the so-called clock kid, Ahmed Mohammed, which became such a big news item. And I couldn't help but that looks like a clock. And there are a lot of things like that. But there's an Arduino there. There's lots of things sort of involved. These girls learned it. But again, someone worked with them to help them do this. And it was wonderful that they're there. Luca is a young boy. He's 9 years old. And I personally liked his story because he said he read about thermocouples in Make magazine and decided that he wanted to create shoe warmers. He took out his sneaker, cut a hole in the sole insert, and created a thing that if you turn it one way, it'll heat your foot, and if you turn it the other way, it'll cool your foot. And he just sort of got the idea and started rolling with it. And I asked him why, and he said, well, I thought people who live up in the Arctic might have cold feet. and almost doesn't quite matter. There's two women. I have a longer video. I'll just give you a taste of what they're talking about. But they're doing a place called Hive Bio, and they want to introduce people to DIY bio. So how to pull DNA out, how to study it, and all that. So we'll just get a little flavor from them.
Hive Bio is a community bio space. It's a biohacker space wherein people can either come take classes to learn about biosciences, a bunch of different kinds of biosciences, or participate in or lead their own research projects, and we provide the lab space for people to do.
Okay, so if I walked in there, what would I see?
If you walked in there, well, it depends on if it's an open lab day
Let's say
or
it is.
class day.
So open lab day, we have about 4 or 5 different benches. On those benches, you would see equipment such as a PCR machine, ways to replicate DNA. You would see refrigerators, you would see pipettes, you would see autoclaves, ways to sterilize a sample. So you would see test tubes and different buffers.
Yep.
You would see assay machines to read.
I think you get the idea there. But these are self-organized spaces where they're trying to bring people in. Now, some of the things you see at Maker Faire are like this. This is a solar-powered tricycle called Daisy, and have been to Burning Man, and its maker Sam Carter's up there. And he's from Vancouver actually, but it's something they toured. They'd been at Burning Man, and it came up here. And there's almost a small group of people that work on these projects. And his goal, he talks about wanting to almost build a mechanical circus and take it from town to town. I'm going to skip over his video. This one I'm going to do just because it's fun. I don't always know why people show up at Maker Fairs. But this is a guy dressed as Mario, Robin Hood, and just a marching brass band. It's just such fun. But again, why do they do these things? And I think it's to engage with the community and share something they love. So I think one of the best stories I have from Seattle, though, is a woman that goes by Queen Mary. And she was riding around in a wheelchair, and I went up and started talking to her. And, well, you'll hear from her.
I am extremely disappointed with the poor quality of the current available wheelchairs, and they are extremely expensive. So I've made something that can go from the boardroom to the backcountry and everywhere in between. It's the size of a regular wheelchair, but it can go over up to about 9 inches of clearance. It's significantly more capable, and it's what I'm going to use to go backpacking in the woods.
Okay, how did you get inspired that you could do this?
Well, the actual original idea came from a friend's fishing net, believe it or not. But Carl Bass had a presentation at Maker Faire in San Francisco that I watched that introduced me to Fusion 360. I was actually able to learn Fusion over the web, and I worked with their evangelists and made an entirely new prototype model and animated it and everything.
So again, sorry about the background noise there, but this is someone who didn't go to a Maker Faire. They just saw a video from Maker Faire and inspired them to act on this idea that they could change something in their life that was so important to them, which is their wheelchair, and to change it not just for daily use, but particularly because she wanted to do backpacking and go out on trails. And she sent me after Maker Faire, hey, here's some of my work. This is her 3D model, right, that she designed, right? And really interesting. And here's her prototype. She takes it out for a ride. But I think, there's the netting and other things that she mentioned. I don't quite know what her invention part of this is yet, but what I really love is that she's acting on it. And what she actually wrote me about, which was an important thing, she talked to me about how she originally was told by some people she had to patent her idea, and she got really frustrated by that. The patent process was hard. And then she really got into more maker mindset that she wanted to share her idea. And so she was kind of asking, were there open source communities where, you know, she could share what she was doing with other people? And there's sort of a yes and a no to that. It's more complicated. But, you know, it means something that people can figure this out more and more. The day, I want to kind of, this you might not think fits. It might be one of those hackathons that I thought about, you know. But Microsoft last year got a new CEO, Satya Nadella, I believe his name is. And he came in and someone said he's trying to reprogram Microsoft, which is a good phrase. And they had a week where everybody from the company came together for a company meeting. And it was really like the top leaders explaining the strategy for the whole company, the year strategy to go forward, all that. He decided to kick that all out and replace it with a week-long hackathon and invite everybody in to just innovate and do things. And, you know, as a way of changing culture, they had like 12,000 participants in their hackathon. They had something like, you know, I can't remember all the numbers, but they had some like, they put the stuff online, then asked Microsoft employees around the world to review them and vote on them, and they had like 88,000 people registered to do that. And what I was kind of impressed by, which kind of related to the other, you know, and they showed me some videos I can't find online, but they actually, many of them were trying to tackle problems like, you know, for a blind person who can't find their way easily, and they were, you know, doing some different things here. But I can't find a lot of detail to support this, but it was, I was really impressed that this is something that actually can happen, almost sponsored and be part of a company's DNA to do this. They also have something called Microsoft Garage, which looks a bit like, you know, the space you have here. And they have a group of people, about 300 in their main campus that sort of are active in that space. And you know, some of the cool things there is, you know, they have a tablet thing called Surface, and there was a group that came together in Microsoft Garage, and they built like a new docking station for it to put the Surface next to your thing. And they just sort of started working together on thinking, well, how could we improve Surface? And whoever's like president of the Surface division went through Microsoft Garage just on a tour, and he stopped and he said, well, wait, what is that? and he said, I haven't seen that before. And he said, is that from my group? And he said, no, the employees that put that together were from all parts of Microsoft. One works for MSN, the old beast. And he was just really surprised that this talent sort of reorganized itself in a way that benefited him, and they actually end up taking it. So, but it says something to me a little bit in this sense that I think even companies are recognizing a bit this sense of service. You know, like it isn't just enough to have the job. They thought, one of the people said about Microsoft Garage, they thought it was essential to actually recruit and retain talent was to have spaces where they could almost freely innovate and work together. And I think things like this mean a lot to people, but they also form a culture within a company that this is stuff that matters and is celebrated. And I think that's what I've tried to do with Maker Faire a bit, is to say we can celebrate all these forms of making in our culture that we often don't and doesn't have a place. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you guys have probably been exposed to all this. But one of the things I was kind of looking at it for, and just want to throw it out there, is, you know, in the making of a maker, in some ways, you know, we kind of want to get people up there, right? We want them to feel that. And I think there are reasons sometimes even at this basic level, that people aren't makers because they struggle with resources at a very basic level. But I think in some ways, and this doesn't quite reflect it, but I feel like there's a maturity possibly happening in the maker movement of going from things that I do for myself, like a hobby, to things that I kind of do, in a sense, still for myself because it makes me feel good, but it's really outer oriented. It's oriented towards the community. It's ending up, I'm helping kids learn, I'm helping someone else with a problem. And again, I think it has more to do with being this kind of person than it does about like making money or other kinds of options. That this is kind of, in a sense, a hierarchy of meaning, We only get so much meaning from food, and it's a good thing, right? But making food, or cooking for people moves us up that line. So I just want to, this is the idea, I guess, that I'm proposing here, is to see the potential anyway, and the reality of the maker movement for really helping, makers who are helping people help themselves. And that's what I will end on tonight. One other thing I wanted to add, I didn't emphasize enough. So I kind of said in the beginning, but this doesn't often and usually doesn't have a business model, right? It's hard to make money helping people help themselves. And yet it's probably the most important thing we can do. And then someone actually asked me to write a column recently on, the future of work, and, the provocation was robots will steal your jobs. And I said, good, because then maybe we can do things that really help other people who aren't, easily served today. There's so many problems. Just like if you think of that Bay Area Makethon on assistive technology, none of us know about most of those problems. And yet, what if we could dive into things that aren't possible to do because they don't have the right business model? Now, I think business models emerge out of some of this, but the early web didn't have a business model. I created the first website in 1993, and people were saying, well, how would you ever make money on the web? And I probably personally didn't solve that problem, but Google did. And people have made a lot of money. Open source. O'Reilly was kind of an organizer of the early open source movement. And people said, well, that'll never, like a Forrester Research or these other companies, we're not going to follow open source software. Nobody buys it. How could it have any value? It's free. And yet all these companies, as Tim O'Reilly would say, were built using open source software as their infrastructure. And I think, going in this direction, the maker movement, it won't just be this short term of people who are making products to sell in marketplaces, but I think there's something much bigger here that we don't quite understand. I don't claim to understand, but I think this is the direction that we want to go and not be limited because there isn't necessarily a business model there. Doing these activities, making our community better, is something we should do anyway. Thank you. So that's about a half hour or so since we started. I was really hoping to get into hearing from you. And it's really kind of this community services provocation, but I'm happy to talk about anything, any question you have. I'd love to hear what you're doing. As you kind of see, I go to maker fairs to see what other people are doing, not to talk to them about what I'm doing. So please comment, questions. I'd be happy to have any of those. Yes, sir. No, honestly, the movement part to me seems accidental or not something I was focused on. I was focused on trying to make things popular, in a sense, like Make magazine sort of echoes popular science or popular mechanics, and I love that word. I want these things to be more a part of people's lives and awareness. I was telling Alan, when I had the idea for the magazine, even before I really had the magazine, but I had an idea, which was sort of people would start hacking physical things the way they hack software, and that we would look at ourselves as more capable in doing that. And so I kind of try, I saw people doing robotics, and I go over and talk to them, and I saw people doing cars, and I talk to them. But, the people, I had just a strong reaction when I kind of said, what kind of projects are you doing? There was a strong reaction from people that made me feel this was important and unrecognized. And these were people that I felt were not in the mainstream. They weren't creating Facebook apps or iPhone apps. They were doing stuff in their garage. But I'd say, hey, what are you doing? And they'd have a great story. I'd say, that's compelling. And that kind of led me to Maker Faire. So can I bring them together? Because I think nobody gets to meet these people, and they're shy, and they're very private about some of their work. Even their family sometimes doesn't understand what they're doing. To flush this out and make it more visible, it was my intention. And then just make, almost getting more people involved. I didn't mention it earlier, but we've to get to that, 150 Maker Fairs and others we're at, we wrote a playbook on how to create a Maker Faire based on what we learned and others. And we kind of intentionally aimed it for a fairly small Maker Faire, not something that is as big as what you'll see at New York. But what I wrote pages and pages about was community organizing, not event organizing. It was really what makes a Maker Faire is to go out in the community and find those makers, even if they don't use that word, and even if they're not aware of this. It's a little easier today maybe to say, hey, who's the makers in the community? But it's like going and finding the lost arts, finding people who are doing stuff that are unappreciated, finding the artists that don't have a home somewhere like kinetic art or things that are large or Burning Man art. It has a home in the desert, but it's not something that easily is brought into a city sometimes. So that sort of is what drove us. And I think the fact that we kept discovering more people, it was almost like, like leading a parade and seeing more people forming behind you. It was that sense of it. But I never had, it was almost more a little bit, I think the movement things, became a term that other people started to use. How do I understand this? How do I think about it? And it's another sort of topic, but, what kind of movement is it, and what does it like relate to? What are the kinds of things? Just as a quick answer to that, I'll try one on you. But it's hard for me to relate it to the civil rights movement, which extremely significant, extremely important, political and really legislative change and really cultural change at the same time. But I came up with something you might think is trivial, but there's more marathoners today than ever. And if you look at the growth of marathoning, it's something that hasn't gotten any easier, but more people do it than ever. There's more opportunities to do it. But I started to study, one is amateur participation. Running has almost always been amateur, but you started to get a few people that were, like the Boston Club that runs the marathon there was 120 years old. They always had 300 people running the marathon. It was kind of the club-like, the same people that did it. But in the 70s, it starts to take off. And it's the same time that companies like Nike take off. And I thought that, it's sort of this confluence of fitness. But there's something very personal about this. Like, this is a goal that something hard that I want to do and prove to myself. And I think that as marathons spread and they went into other cities, they were often organized and sponsored by track clubs who, to get participants, had to train people to run in the marathon. And they did something that schools don't do. It's like the woman talking about blacksmithing. They didn't ask if you were a runner. They didn't look at your body and say, I don't think you can do this. They said, if you can train, you can run a marathon. And we have a 12-week training program, just participate. And so the model that I have with marathon was just this sort of participatory culture, like the more people that do it, the good for everybody, and you want to make it easy for people to come in and do that. And so that's kind of one of the movements. There's the food movement I mentioned earlier is another. Sometimes I do think that's the worry with 3D printing. And often for, like elementary school kids, they'd be great with cardboard. One of the things I didn't realize, though, I kind of had this mind, well, I'm really interested in high school and particularly in middle school, because you do make things as a kid in primary school or kindergarten, first grade, But I've kind of found out that's not so true anymore. We're taking not only the sort of the standardized forms of education, we're pushing them down, and we're trying to get kids to pass tests early and earlier. And we're even moving into the after-school program, which should be, hey, free and experiment. No, we're gonna double down on the science textbook or math or whatever it is. And but I do think I've tried to put a lot of energy into advocating for maker spaces in schools and libraries so that we have more places in the community for more kids to have access to tools and materials, but also mentorship. And my model, like there are fab labs and other things, and they tend to have a standardized, like just as a high-tech model. And I've kind of said, start it organically with whatever you can. I had a teacher in California, or a principal actually, who heard me talk and said, I'm going to create a space. I don't have a budget for it, but I have a little bit of room that I can use. She sent a letter home to parents and said, find things around your house that kids can make with, put them in a Ziploc bag and send them into school. We'll sort them, and that's how we'll get things going. And the next year, she had more things. But actually, the two things that were great, she engaged the community, first of all, in solving the problem and got them invested in it. And they wanted to support it. She said, I've never had more volunteers for any program because parents wanted to come in and help it. So there's all this stuff that's happening that's really good. And I hope, it isn't just the shop class model that I'm so much interested in. Makerspace can be a shop class. I think it could be a better than shop class. But I'm really interested in almost like the 2/3 of a student body that just isn't engaged in school. They're not tracking academically with the program, if you will, and they're bored. And we're wasting their time. And shop class and these other programs were often just alternative ways of learning for them. I don't care, most of them didn't go into trade, but I've talked to a lot of adults who went to shop class, and they talked about it as like fresh air. They got to do something, that they didn't get. They just didn't like books. They didn't like sitting in their seat. They wanted to be up and doing things, and that's really the goal I have with this is reaching. I'm not trying to get more kids into MIT. I'm trying to get more kids into learning and doing and figuring out their own path in life. And whatever that is, that's pretty cool. But I hope they own it, and we can help them. Yeah. To be honest, I never knew what the outcome would be, and I didn't worry about it. I didn't know if the magazine would be successful. I didn't know if the Faire would attract people, and I didn't worry too much about that. I worried more on it being, a good idea. Like one of the things I tried to do with the magazine that sort of affects is I took a category that, if you look at even the old Popular Mechanics or some, didn't have much of a design to it. There wasn't much of a look and feel as a magazine. So really tried to create something that was clean and crisp and I kind of, if you just look at our logo and look at it, it's something that sort of punched at you in a way that those other, a lot of stuff was, I can't quite describe it, was grungy or too geeky, And I actually wanted to apply like higher levels of design to this category of how-to information in the way that like food magazines had tracked that way, or a lot of home design magazines had. The Maker Faire, we were just kind of motivated by the idea of reinventing the fair. What was a county fair like? And hey, you brought pigs and pies from distant farms, and you brought them together and shared each other's work. And well, we're doing different things together, but people still want to do that. And this was kind of rich in my head as science fairs, craft fairs, art fairs are all pretty much bringing things you work on and sharing with other people. But too often there's another agenda that competes with that. And one of the big moments for me around Maker Faire was I thought curation, and we do curate, but I thought it would have to be heavier initially. But I realized in some ways that we, like museums and other things, we ask people to bring in what they're doing, what they're making. I don't go out to the community and say, I'm looking for this. I don't have that kind of curator's mind of, we need more of this or less of that, or here's our theme, sustainability. I kind of want to see what the community is actually doing and then allow themes to emerge from that. And so being in some ways, conscious that we're organizing a venue for you to show your work rather than for me to show you off as the work, right? And so it's kind of a real different thing than some of the art world and other people think about that. Sure. You know, and I'm going to be truthful with you on this. You know, earlier, was it last week or something, it started popping up on social media. Hey, Dale, you should see this. And we have you ever heard of Kane's Arcade? Young boy that did cardboard creations, and we had him to Maker Faire. And, you know, so like, in some degree, there's harm in what the school did to him. But there's a little bit of harm in what society does even to correct that, you know. And I think it's important that he gets elevated and recognized and celebrated, but it is sort of a distortion of the world of a 14-year-old. And so part of what my dream would be to get him to come to Maker Faire as a maker or as a 14-year-old, not as a celebrity. I would just hope he meets other kids like him, and he will if he, you know, walks around. Rather than, you know, he's coming with a documentary film crew and, you know, a family, and they all kind of have a stake in this now. And it's we have to navigate that, and that's what I mean about being true. Like, I actually just want the kid to have a good experience, and the positive side. Jay Silver or Makey wrote this on a list, and he said, you know, the reaction to this 10 years ago would have been, this is a bad kid in a bad system. And he said, I think it says everything, that there's an overwhelmingly positive reaction that this is a good kid in a bad system. And he is a good kid, you know. But there's all this blowback more recently. He didn't invent that, or he's not a maker because he borrowed the clock. And without wanting to argue with all the trolls out there, you kind of say, he's exactly a maker. He never showed up asking anybody to say he was one thing or another. He was taking things apart and putting them together and calling it, giving it a name, which is what every maker does, right? And you know, Richard Dawkins, it really annoyed me. He kind of like went after the kid, and Dawkins is, you know, a huge advocate, you know, science writer and advocate of science in our society, and it just seemed like a shabby thing to do, to go after the kid and say he's, you know, he didn't create anything original. Well, do most of us at 14? You know, I mean, if he was playing music, you know, he'd be singing a cover song, right? So, you know, and you know, it's just like, that's where he is, and that's great. So I think there's a challenge there, but it is wonderful that like lights just went off in people and said, you know, gee, this kid shouldn't be arrested. He should actually be celebrated, right? Thanks. He will be there on the weekend, but we're trying to figure out what he wants to do, and not if we can do anything to kind of, you know, just kind of keep it quiet, and so he could have the experience. It might be hard to do, though. I like the muddles. I like the puddles. I like the blurring of lines between professional and amateur. And I think, you know, certainly the big push around design thinking was to say that this is something lots of people can do. Whether they truly enable that, I don't know. But I think we really get hung up on the professions. And I think the professions get hung up on themselves. And they're defending turf often. You know, I went to, you know, Washington, whatever, the National Academy of Engineers, and they go, engineers aren't makers. I said that. I go, what do you mean? And he says, well, you know, we have all this blah, blah, blah. And it was really about, you know, we have this status, and if you bring us down to just garage hobbyists, we won't earn what we earn. And I said to him, I said, well, I'll tell you what, the next generation of engineers will very much identify as makers, and I don't know whether they'll come in this building or not. You know, it's an interesting thing, and I don't mean that professions shouldn't have that kind of agenda, but one of the things that I think the maker movement is, you know, is almost, you know, sort of individual over institution, you know, because these tools, it's like the personal computer. It's saying like, you shouldn't touch that computer, only a computer scientist should touch that because they have been trained to work computers. You know, what horseshit, right? We know that. The computers went everywhere, and we all can do quite a bit with them. Not that there isn't a role for computer scientists. Well, I think it's people. I think, you know, my core idea is like when you imagine Maker Faire as just objects around there. You know, they might be interesting. There might be gadgets, and there might be things, you know, drones or stuff. But right. But the real thing for me was that I identify was when I see a maker and I look in their eyes and they're talking about their things, they're fully alive, and it comes across, and it's so compelling. You know, and I think for a kid to talk to an adult who's really passionate about something is a transformative experience. You know, and I think for any person it is. Like, and it may be about this or that, you know. So I'd say the combination of people and that kind of experience, it's how people feel about things, not just what it is. Even if they're not, the other kind of interesting thing about this I've often felt is, you know, having an object to put in front of you and talk about in some ways means you're not talking about yourself, which a lot of shy people it's difficult to do. But yet you are talking about yourself, right? You were revealing yourself through that conversation about that object, but it's kind of safe, and you know, and I think partially Maker Faire ends up being a safe place for people that have strange objects, right? You know, like people aren't there criticizing them. And there was a phrase that one of the women in that talk really set me off is creating sort of non-judgmental areas or spaces for people. You know, like I remember visiting Makerspace at SMU in Dallas, and it was actually created by the design faculty, and they said we wanted to create a place where students could fail and not feel there was an outcome, you know, that was a consequence for that. We wanted them to try things they didn't know how to do. And I think even in most school settings, kids are afraid to try something because of the cost of failure. And that often means they're not really moving ahead or trying things. And we all kind of know, I mean, Alan and I was talking about it, you know from doing your design work that like it is sticking your neck out, and it is creatively taking risks that kind of matters. Well, let me answer this in a more general way. I mean, tomorrow at MakerCon, we have Ellen Williams, who's head of ARPA-E, which is like the energy Department of Energy's version of DARPA, which is Advanced Research Projects Agency. And, you know, I think it's, a number of agencies in Washington are really trying to figure out how they approach and engage the maker community as a source of innovation and new ideas. And it's almost, you know, along that line, just because makers don't need a business model, they will do things and try things that, you know, military contractors and energy contractors won't do, and even scientists sometimes won't do without grant funding. And I think there's a knack for doing this, but I love this chief scientist at Department of Energy said to me, and he just had such passion. He says, we have so many problems that we think makers, you know, could really get involved in. I mean, meaning, you know, there's so many problems in energy that need solutions. And, you know, he gave me one, and it was, and then like Ellen was talking, it's like, she said, because part of the issue is, yes, makers could get involved in this area, like going to Mars or climate change, but those are huge tasks. How do you sort of break it down so that a small team or individuals can do it? And she gave me a good example, was personal heating and cooling devices. Said, like, we heat rooms and entire buildings because someone's cold or hot. What if they could just control the temperature around them, right? And we do that with clothing a little bit, but you know, that's the kind of problem space. One of the things I really thought they did a nice job on that hackathon, Makethon piece was crisply defining the challenges. And I think that's a really good way. And you know, I thought when you asked the question about design, I thought you were going to ask me the question about, well, what do they do after these Makethons? And in many ways, I think Like if I were at a government agency, I'd look at trying to sort of start these challenges with those kind of questions and see how you could build a community around them, with people trying different things, different approaches. And the real win here is if we can share those approaches and see the present work. Like, too many of us kind of start from scratch without knowing what other people are doing. And what if we were able to say, well, someone already tried that and it didn't work, or they are actually, we could iterate beyond where they went and come up with a different material or a different, technique. So I think that sort of broader participatory framework for like open innovation is where, these agencies want to go. I remember NASA talking to them a few years ago, and, with each space shuttle or space station, they might have like 100 experiments, like about microgravity when they send a rocket. He said, but we need tens of thousands of experiments. Where are they going to come from? And so really shifting from saying we're going to do that in-house and come up with, 1,000 experiments to, well, let's source them from lots of people who have ideas and that. And, same with medical and health areas. I think there's a lot of possibility there. Well, we did a White House Maker Faire last year, which was pretty awesome to have them meet the president and have them, have some of our crazy inventions inside the White House. Like, no, I don't know about that. It was really a handshake and move on to the next person in line kind of thing. But he does seem to get it, on a good level. It's kind of funny. I mean, this is almost to your point. So, like, White House has an Office of Science and Technology. They've been extremely supportive. They've helped organize the Maker Faire. We did a National Maker Faire in DC. They convene lots of people and do that. Guess who doesn't show up to those? The Department of Education. It reports to you, It's like, but no, they're not interested in this because they're doubling down on standards and tests, and I go like, well, we'll see where that goes. So, the power really, in some way, like, it's interesting in Korea and China, the government's getting a lot more involved, particularly China. I was in Shenzhen this summer for that, and we had 200,000 people at the Maker Faire because it was free. It was downtown over 4 city blocks. The city provided all the security, the space. The city government provided, and it was big. Not necessarily better, but it was big. But they see it as a way to, they need more people with ideas. They have the capacity to make almost anything, but they've been making things for big companies, and they would like to have smaller companies emerge, more entrepreneurs kind of, go down that path, because they see that as their only way to really grow. Not really, but to kind of get to I have an outside-in strategy with schools that my focus through Maker Faire and things was created in the community. Learning is something that isn't just about school. It happens at home. It happens, through daily interactions. DIY workshops are great places to learn. They're not school. And I think it's what I feel is happening is that is getting drawn into schools. Teachers are bringing it in. And, I don't necessarily need to, what's nice about the charters as private schools, they have a better model of governance. They can decide to do something and do it. Our worst performing schools have trouble making decisions about anything, and that's why, they lack resources, but they also lack governance, good governance. And I think that's really the challenge is this will not happen equally in the beginning, but I really trust that that's the direction it will go in. The only way to get things equally is why they want standards and others is to push it down from the top and make sure everybody does it the same way. But we know that doesn't work. And so I'm really kind of, allowing it to percolate. And we have an education forum on Friday if you're interested. And this year I changed it from being about a bunch of smart people talking about why you should do making in school to really being about educators talking about the work they're doing to bring making into school. Because it's it's almost shifted. Now we have people that are doing it. and they've set up maker spaces. They have experience. They've really changed the nature of school culture in a few districts that I think is really positive. And that's kind of that's kind of the mode. And just an example, every school practically I know has a school garden. How did that get built? It wasn't a federal mandate. It was just a model that people said, I believe in this. This is kind of good. The kid knows how food grows and can work on it. And that was Alice Waters and a bunch of people that started that without a lot of funding. They didn't underwrite school gardens. But today they're part of a budget. They have curriculum. They have all these things. And I think curriculum is actually one of the worst things we could do, to be honest, because I don't want this packaged up in a little box that they open up and say, now I'll give you your little taste of making and we'll move on. What excites me about the other way we're doing it is that teachers are part of the creative process. They are figuring it out and they're invested, and it won't look the same. We don't want it to look the same for every kid in every school. But it's hard to resist that because that's actually where business kind of comes in and says, I'm Pearson and I'll make, making is what we do now. We have a STEM curriculum based on making. It used to be called project-based learning. It used to be called something else, but we just changed the name. Ultimately, it's still kind of procedural and the kids don't, it's not built around the kids learning. And the last point is, school is not built around how kids learn. And isn't that a shame? It's built around what we think they should know. And furthermore, we don't even ask the kind of question, what can you do with what you know? Which is kind of what making really would allow. Very interesting. I've tried a couple times. I once got a terrific note from a group in San Quentin saying that my magazine was really popular with it there. And, and it was kind of filtered by someone else who sent it to me that it said, yeah, we have to cut out a few articles. And then we had this insane idea of doing a prison issue of Make, 40 ways to make a shiv, and so, and that story of upstate New York was like Maker all over it, but like nobody could say it, it was like reading about Escape from Alcatraz or watching that movie. But that really more serious, another example was, I did a CNN piece and I was in Chicago after doing that, and someone wrote me from a deputy sheriff from the Cook County jails. And he said, I have a bunch of kids in here for about 30 days to 60 days. They're going right back to the community they came from, no better than what they came in. And he kind of grokked that they could do stuff. And I talked to him a while. There's all kinds of bureaucracy and stuff involved. I mean, I couldn't do that for him, but and the person in San Quentin, they had a wonderful shop there, and I was supposed to go visit, and there was some problem with the shop manager, and he got fired or let go or something. But the letters I got from those prisoners were really amazing about how it was almost that theme of being productive, like seeing themselves as a productive person and how it had restored something to them that they had lost for 30 years, some of them wrote about it. So, and I have to actually talk to the White House. I've never found an organizing principle to get after it, but I think it'd be fascinating. And again, with these high rates of incarceration for these populations, and like a lot of things like that I learned about when I talk about those 2/3. It's not that those people aren't smart; they are. They just never had the opportunity to do anything with their intelligence, right? So it's a great opportunity if you're really interested in that. I'd be happy to keep push on that a little bit. Yeah. Well, I don't think. I'll tell you this. It made me think. I became a grandfather a year and a half ago, so I have a little one there. That it's one of the beauties of what I do. Like, I look at him as a young maker. I see how he walks around and touches every knob and turns it, and he looks. he imitates things and he finds it. You just see it, like in the raw so I think for the most part I wouldn't talk to a 5-year-old too much. And again, if you look at what Montessori and others were about, they're actually pretty structured about this, and I'm not sure it's the right way, but it's okay. I wrote a piece about that once. It's like she talked about the education of the senses. That was opening the door to perceptions that they would need. And so it was like, are things hot or cold? Are they heavy or light? Are they rough or smooth? And we kind of think the kids just pick that up. But she was almost like, you would almost teach like a music lesson. She'd set up manipulatives and things that's what you would go through. And she saw it as a foundation for building. And one of my worries with kids is, it's kind of like the touchscreen generation, that's their tactile experience in life is a glass screen, not grabbing things and pulling things and stretching things and, using that. And I think if the maker movement can do things in some ways, is to almost sort of restore respect for the hands in the way they kind of connect to our brain, and not denigrate that with things like, oh, it's manual labor, but I'm a brainiac, and like, no, you're not. It's just like, we appreciate analytical skills and not so much, these other tactile things. Again, one of those things I think we're trying to change is like practice over theory, that especially as kids. Theory is efficient to teach, but doesn't mean you know anything just because you repeat a theory. Practice builds up knowledge yourself. Okay, Alan?
Yeah, I think we should probably let you meet with the students 101.
Yeah.
So you can just see this generous spirit of Dale, who's like such a giver. I also think that it's worth noting this moment in history, especially I didn't realize it was the 10th anniversary. And I was thinking that like the Maker Movement and Make Magazine and Maker Faire is sort of fact now, but it wasn't fact in the beginning. And you fought so hard to advocate for this way of like, again, giving this permission and these venues to show creativity and ingenuity and just hacking. These words have become so much part of our culture now, and they have become a kind of gospel in themselves in a strange way. And so I think it's important to have an historical perspective about where we are now, that Dale is here 10 years later talking about this because it worked, right? But in the beginning, you were talking about this not knowing if it would work at all, with sort of probably incredible forces, sort of resistive forces. So we don't take it for granted,
No.
and I want to
But
thank you.
I think the thing that probably has worked more than anything in our advantage is we decided to make Maker Faire a family-oriented event, not a geek event, not a professional event. And it meant we got, adults, but we got those kids there. And today, when I started to make magazine, I might have thought my audience would look like you and maybe a little older, right? But today it's like the kid like Luca is reading it at 9 years old. He said he's been reading it since he was 7, and I think I would have never imagined that it would occupy that place in their lives, almost like a skateboarding magazine, a little bit cool of things that are hard to do. You want to be that thing. And I think so the fact that kids really have demonstrated such interest in this, and that means something to their parents who often don't know what it is they might be interested in, I think has really helped to overcome some of that. This could be small, but when you see the broad range of kids get involved, you realize this could be big.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to thank the student committee for producing tonight, and Gabrielle and Alicia and Marco, and Walter Tyler from the Office of Learning Technologies for documenting. And of course, Dale
Thank you.
Dougherty, thank you so much.